This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, thank you everybody for coming today. Our speaker today is Kim Madsen, and she owns K Madsen Consulting, I believe based out of Wilmer, right, Kim?
Mhm.
Yep. So her passion's always been to work with people who want to excel and experience life by embracing their gifts. There's nothing better than the aha moments that individuals and businesses have when they begin to live and use their strengths intentionally. Everyone should be given the chance to be the hero of their own story. And she's going to talk today about navigating change, personal and professional. They go hand in hand. And I will turn it over to Kim.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to join you. I am a Renville girl myself. I grew up in Morton, so definitely drive through many of your locations and know many people down in that area. So happy to be here. And today we're going to talk about change. It's one of the topics that I talk about a ton. Just a little more background on myself is that I, for the past 3 years, own K Madsen Consulting. I'm a certified Gallup Strengths coach. So I do a lot of leadership training for companies, working with team building, and moving their companies forward with a positive culture. Well, a big part of positive culture is change. And so this topic comes up all the time, no matter what group, what organization, what county I'm working with. It's always about change and the resistance to change. And there's so many factors that go into it. And so today I'm gonna walk you through. It'll be probably about 30 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions. And so we're gonna talk about looking at personal and professional change. And what we have to start doing is change is one of those things that's very personal. And even if it's in the workplace, it really comes down to the individual, not about their group. And we have to start looking at it from when we think about change, do you personally see change as a positive or a negative or somewhere in between? That's the first question you should all be asking yourself. Do I see change as a positive? Do I see it as a negative or somewhere in the middle? Or does it depend? And so when we start to think about that, we've been in a season of change now for the past few months, and really world change, not even just something that's specific to us. And it's changed the way we live our daily life. It's about whether you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask, it's a change. And the change can be that you're walking by and somebody is wearing a mask and you aren't, and you can't see each other's face. That's a change. But we need to stop and we need to kind of go backwards a little bit when we're thinking about change. And we first need to start with understanding, change. It can be looking at it from your work perspective. It could be changing your marriage, your parenting, home education, divorce, pandemic, all of those areas. Where is change occurring for you? Where is change occurring for your employees? And like I said, it can be sometimes just in one area, but sometimes it can be across all areas. And so when you're talking about employees and you're running a business, you need to really take a step back as a leader, and you need to really say, okay, when we're looking at this change within our organization or outside the organization, and somebody might be digging their heels in a little bit and not really all on board for your change, you might want to start saying, are there possible other areas that change is affecting them that they might not even be aware of themselves? Because when it comes to change, there are many people. And so when I work with individuals and organizations, the first thing we do is we start to do some self-evaluation, looking internally for yourself, because that's always the first step. Is you have to say, okay, where am I at? How do I feel about this? And what's impacting it? Because when we're looking at change, there's always the 7 stages of grief that go along with change. And so when it can be a small change, a big change, it doesn't really matter, but we have to look at the 7 stages of grief. So I want you to think about a time when a change was happening in your life, and it can be recent or it can be a while ago, or a change that might be occurring soon. And whether if you're a person and if this change is sort of a negative for you, I want you to think about it in terms of this, is in that change, there's going to be the 7 stages of grief. The first stage is going to be the shock and denial. And this is always when you look at a change that wasn't a positive for you, and you can place and you can see for yourself where the shock and denial occurred. The next step is the pain and guilt that comes with a change. And so an example that I can use is if you think about when ACMC switched to be Caris / Center Care. I know many of my friends work there, and I use this example all the time, is that it was shock and denial, and then it went to the pain of changing something. Because the system had been in place for so long and there hadn't been change of that magnitude before. And so it came with shock and denial, and then the pain and the guilt. The third step is always anger and bargaining. Fourth step is depression, a reflection, loneliness. And this is where we'll see people retreat. And we're going to talk more about them. I just want to run through them first. The fifth step is the turn, and that's where things start to get a little bit better and people start to see a positive, that things can be better and they're going to get better. So step 5 is the turning point. And 6 is reconstruction and working through it. And 7 is acceptance. So when you think about going through the change, and when I talk to my friends at ACMC and now Caris, is that it was about a system that had been in place for a really long time. And so when we think about change, most people aren't used to change and they don't think about it on a daily basis. However, our world is changing every day, but we don't think about it in those terms. So even if we step away and you think about your organization or how it is, when you think about an office space, how many people ever change offices? Or do people normally sit in the same spot all the time? Do they take their coffee break at the same time? Do they go to lunch at the same time? It becomes very regimented for most, unless they have a job where they're out and about and doing, but still there's a pattern and there's a process. So normally as adults in the workplace, we are not used to change. We're used to very much a system that's in place. So when change occurs, these 7 stages begin. So what can people do on the other side of that to get them used to? And it's about making sure that when you're hiring and bringing people into your organization, that change is a natural part of what you do. And people always push back on this and they're like, do you know how much work it is to change offices? Do you know how much work it is to make people change spots within? It's not about making, it's about setting up a culture of change. So when big change comes, it's not as shocking to the system, but people are used to it. It's a part of the culture. So they go, oh, we do this all the time. Change for us is a norm, and it's because change advances us. And so by bringing that in as a part of your culture, it sets people up that it's the norm, not the exception. When we look at the 7 stages of grief for change, one of the things that comes out is fear. And this is usually the reason that people also dig their heels in. There's something that's keeping them stuck in a fear cycle. They're afraid of what's on the other side, the unknowns that are out there. And so we have to stop and we have to think about, what am I fearful of? And again, this comes back to self-evaluation. And I want you to think about that. I want you, again, to think about a time, whether it's in work or it's been in your marriage or it's been a family or something has changed and where it brought fear. And I can tell you that a lot of times the examples or the things that I hear from people, if we want to take marriage or we want to talk about divorce, is in the instance, and you can see the 7 stages of shock as people separate, go through the process. It's the shock and denial, the pain and guilt. But if they look back further, they will see a pattern. And they see that am I holding on to something? And can be workplace as well. What am I holding on to right here? What am I afraid of on the other side? Because if I stay right here and I don't accept the change, is it because status quo is safer? Does it feel safer? And status quo will keep us stuck. It doesn't allow us to grow. It doesn't allow our organization to grow. And so change has to be a built-in process. So it's weird when I can't see your faces and see your expressions, because usually people are responding in that way. And so I want you to think about, thanks, Jordan, you know, because all of us have been through some change. And I want you to think about, and if anybody's wanting to share this, but I want to give you just like 30 seconds. I hope you have pen and paper by you, or just some thinking time. And I know that this might not be like the normal way that people guide you through a lesson, but the only way you're really going to take something away from this is if you do a little bit of self-work. And so I want you to think about, and we'll just go with the past 3 months. I want you to think about a change that has occurred, and think about your feelings and the process that you have gone through to get yourself on the other side of seeing it as a positive. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're just going to take like a minute, and I want you to think about it, and I want you to think about how you felt about it at first, and then I want you to write it out. All right, so the reason I have you do that is it's really important, because in any conversation that you have with another individual, when you're talking about change, it can be the change in the weather. Minnesota, that's what we usually talk about, right? So we were talking about today, which was it was a difference, right? That for once we weren't talking about a pandemic, we weren't talking about all the other things that are going on in the world, but we could talk about the weather. But change is such a natural occurrence, but we don't ever look at how much change occurs every day and where the positive change lies. So if you were to think about what you wrote down as what you were fearful of, or of a change that's impacted you in the past, Stephanie, what did you write about?
I wrote about working from home with all the pandemic stuff that's going on.
Okay. And so that's always, the change in that, having kids at home with the school when school was in. If you talk to 5 different parents, you're going to get 5 different reactions to what it was like to have kids at home during school. even with having different children in my home, the change was different for each of them. And meeting them each where they were at in that change was really important. So when you think about even within your house, if you're 1 to 5 people, change is always going to impact each of you differently. You're always going to be in a place of working your way possibly through those 7 stages of grief. And then once you get beyond it, of figuring out how that's going to be positive. And when you stop and think about that in your workplace, and you can't understand why can't that person get to this place of thinking this is a good change? How come they can't get there faster? How come they're not on board? It's because they're stuck and they're in the process. And so there's different ways to help people get through it. But the first one is recognizing it, recognizing that they're in a process and being able to have an open conversation about where they are. The other thing that can be done when we're talking about change is if I know, so I don't know how many of you have taken Gallup Strengths Finder, but if you know your own strengths and where you are and what your top 5 are, it's going to give you a greater understanding of how you work yourself through change. If your staff have taken Gallup Strengths, it will give you a greater understanding of how they work through change and get to the opposite side. I'll just share with you. So my top 5 strengths are maximizer, achiever, activator, relator, strategic. They're all super fast-paced strengths, which generally for me means that I can go from point A to point B in a transition or a change process in a very quick manner. Now, if you had intellection or an analyzer, input, others, and I know if you haven't taken strengths, it doesn't mean a lot to you, but of the 34 strengths, if you have some of the others, it's a much slower process. So what happens when we're going through change, personally or professionally, and you move fast and you get to the point of like, that's a positive. Well, this is a positive change. We're just going to go for it. This is the direction. This is what's best. And what if you have a handful or 2 people who are stuck on the other side? But you don't understand how your strengths differ, where they're at in their process, and you don't understand how they process information, how they process their feelings. And because everybody's on mute, I'm just going to answer it for you. What happens is this side goes, what's wrong with them? This side goes, what's wrong with them? And it causes conflict. So it's all about taking time. You have to understand yourself first. And once you understand yourself, what you can do then is share it with others. So what I could tell Jordan, Stephanie, Bridget, Joel, Susie, the first time you met me, I can say, hey, here's just some things that you need to know about how I work. So I'm a maximizer. It means that I always think things can be improved. So if I come to you and bring you new ideas, please know it's not questioning the process that's already in place. I'm just a person who's always thinking about how to improve things. If I come to you and say, I see this greatness in you, please know I'm not questioning you. It's just I see greatness in others that you probably don't see yourself. It's one of the strengths. It's my strength. When you can work from a place of strength, and the people that work with you can work from their place of strength, you become a much stronger team who can work through change to get to the other side, because you take the time to actually understand the other person and realize everybody's individual. And we know that. That's not rocket science. I'm not telling you anything you don't know in that sense, is that we're all individual. But when you take the time to actually say, hey, Stephanie, tell me about your strengths and how that works for you. How do your strengths come out in your work? How does that come out for you personally? How does it come out for you in your relationships? Because your strengths also dictate the type of relationships that you have in the workplace, outside of the workplace. Because if I can tell you, or you can tell me, if Jordan can tell me about his strengths when we first meet, when we first become a team, it sets it up that I don't have to guess, and I can't create a story in my head about Jordan because he's already informed me about his strengths. So when he says something that I'm like, I don't know, I don't really follow it, all I have to do is go back and say, oh, that's right. Jordan told me about his strengths and how he works, and that he needs a little more time to process. And I'm totally just using you as an example, Jordan.
No, and funny you say that. I've got a friend, Michael Darger, with the state. He has on the bottom of his email signature, my strengths are A, B, C, D, and E.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how all the companies that I work with, or the counties, we do that. And then everybody knows, right? And some people really embrace it and other people are, but it helps in communication. And so, and I always tell people, do you want me to guess and make up stories about you in my head about why we're not on the same page? Because that's what we do as humans. Our egos get us to a place where if we just leave a meeting and we disagree, Jordan, and all of a sudden you and Stephanie are over at the water cooler having a conversation, my ego is telling me that you're talking about what we disagreed about in the meeting. I don't know that as a fact, but the ego tells me that. But when I bring myself back to center and say, okay, what do I really know? I know that you two are talking at the water cooler. That is not a problem. That's an internal problem for me that I have to shut my ego down. Okay? So again, change personally and professionally all starts with you. And how are you reacting? Where are you in the process? How do you personally feel about change? Because like I said, some people, for me, I'm like, change is always around me, and I think change is great because I'm a change agent. That's my thing. I love change. And so, but other people not so much, and that's okay. But we need to know where we personally stand on change and then be able to work ourselves through to get to the other side. Because if we're stuck in a status quo, you don't want to be there. You don't want to be in status quo. Because if you're really stuck in status quo just because it's comfortable, just think of all you're missing out on the other side, because fear has you locked into status quo. So if you start with yourself and you can analyze and come to those places, then you can, once you understand yourself, is when you can start to learn about others. And you then can ask those questions about moving to that next place. So this is where I'm going to go to the next piece, is because I want us to also talk about, in change, everything's changing. So if you need to reset your brain on change as a positive, think about your bank account is changing every day, hopefully up, right? Positive change. There are things every day that we want to be changing. We want to be moving up. We want to always be improving, and that takes change and it takes self-work. But I want to introduce you to a book, and it has to do also with strengths. And so I'm going to have to replace it with a different book. So hang on 1 second, as I have this tilted up. And so the book is called Vital Friends by Tom Rath. You get it off Amazon or the Gallup website. And this comes down to connections. And once you understand your strengths, even if you don't, it's really important that you have your own board, your personal board. And if this is a board at work too, you can look at it that way. But I want you to think about, everyone thinks the expectation we put on people to be well-rounded, right? We want our kids to be well-rounded. It's the message is everybody needs to be well-rounded. Well, the reality is not so much. And when you think about your friends, you think about your spouse, you think about the people that you love and cherish, they don't have to be everything. It all comes down to your expectations. And so I give the example. So there's several different connector, vital friends roles that people play. And I just want to share them with you. And I want you to write them down because then I'm going to give you a little homework when we're done. So the 8 vital roles that people play in your life. You have the builder, and I'll talk about them in a second. The champion, collaborator, companion, connector, energizer, mind opener, and navigator. When I read this book, and obviously certified in strengths and have done a ton of different types of certifications. However, this right here was very eye-opening to me personally, because if we look into society, it said some people you just kind of have to like cut them out. They don't belong in your circle. You want to circle yourself with the best people. Absolutely true. You are the culmination of the people that you hang out with most. Totally believe that. So when it comes down to this, I want you to think about 2 people in your life who you spend the most time with. Okay? And then we're going to walk through this. And I want you to think about what role those 2 people play. Do they play one role? Do they play 2, 3, 4? Do they play all of these for you? Okay. So builder is the person who builds you up. They're the person who's always telling you to go for it. They're the person who is in your corner saying you can do it. That's your builder. These are very short little examples. The champion, that is the person who's always in your corner. That is the person who has your back no matter what. And when you turn around, they are only saying positive and nice things about you. And if somebody's talking badly about you, they are going to be the ones who have your back. That is your champion. Your collaborator, that's your partner. That's the person who you share all of your ideas, the person who you can work on projects with, the person who you might plan a party with, the person who you truly enjoy spending time with and being able to collaborate on projects. Companion, this is the person who you can just sit next to and just enjoy each other's company. The person who's always by your side. The connector, this is the person who is going to connect you when you say, oh, I need this or I have that. And they'll be like, you know who you need to meet? You need to meet so-and-so. I need to connect you. They are the person who gets you to who you need. And then you have the energizer. This is the friend who, when you're with them, you laugh a lot and you have a good time, but that's about it. The mind opener, this is the person who brings you ideas and way of thinking that you may have never thought about something before in your conversations. This is a person who thinks differently than you do, but you enjoy being able to have those type of conversations. And then the navigator, that is the person who is always going to, when you get off track, to bring you back. Who they keep you focused, who they're going to be like, Stephanie, that's not what you said you were going to do. Your goal in life was this. Has it changed? What's your track? They're the person who's not afraid to tell you or remind you of what you have said. Okay. So now I want to give you an example. So I have a friend who I've been a friend with for since we've been born, forever. And we hang out probably about every 6 months. And there's been a time, because we don't talk about faith, we don't talk about work, we don't talk about things that are important to me, probably things that are important to her, except for our kids. And there was a time where I was like, I'm not sure that we're meant to be friends anymore, until I read this. Because the expectations in my head were that friends truly are the ones who can talk about deep things with you. They're the people who do all of these things, right? Who fill all these roles. That's what a friend is, if they fill all the roles. Not true. A person can fill one role. And what I realized is that my friend fills my energizer role. She's an energizer for me. She doesn't have to do all of these other things. It was my expectations of her. And when you start to think about your friends and who you're closest to and the roles they play, when you realize that a person just plays one role, it changes your expectations. And when you change your expectations, what happens is conflict goes away. You aren't disappointed. But also then what you're able to do is you're able to, I've been able to do this, and I did this. If you make a whole list, I sent a text to each of my friends and said, hey, I just need you to know you are a builder for me. You are my champion. You're a collaborator. They didn't need to know what it meant. I just had to say, these are all really great things. Because we don't do that enough for the people that are in our circle. We don't do that enough for people in general, is to say how they positively impact us. And it also comes to, do you know how people around you like to be recognized? You know, we're talking about change, knowing yourself, getting over fear, going through grief process. People don't generally talk about what they're going through personally, and sometimes they're not going to talk about what they're going through professionally. And so we talk about people in our society wearing masks, but I'm talking about the mask of the smiling face, when behind the smiling face is not all perfect. And especially with all we have been going through lately, it is important that you understand for yourself, where are you at? And to not think that you have to be behind the smiling face all the time. Because change is hard sometimes, but you have to know where you're at and then be willing to reach across and say, where are you at? And wherever that person is fine. We just have to help each other continue to move forward and move past the fear and grief and status quo to get to the other side of saying, okay, how are we just going to do this? How are we going to manage it? So, change, personally, professionally, we're all going through it every day. You have to do the self-work. Then you take it and you say, how do we bring this to our company, to our county? How do we help people know? Being mentally well is a big piece of it, and working through it, but that takes self-work as well, and sometimes seeking outside help. And then getting to the other part of understanding that change is positive and that it's needed to keep us all moving forward. That is my challenge for you, is I want you to take and build your list and at least reach out to one or two people and shoot them a text saying, I just need you to know this is the impact that you make on my life because you do this for me. You're my connector, you're my builder, you're my champion. I guarantee you there's nothing better than the smile that you'll put on their face. Questions. Questions for me on anything that we've talked about today.
Kim, we did have one question from Nicole. She was wondering where she can find the strengths test.
Oh, so StrengthsFinder, I actually can get you the code. Everything's online. You can buy the book, but most people buy the book, do the assessment, and then it sits on a shelf somewhere. So for $12, I just invoice you and I send you the code, and then I give you a video on how to use your online account, and everything is right there. So super easy. Other questions? I encourage you all to take some time and actually, when a change comes up, do that writing exercise. Think about the past, think about the present, and write out about what concerns you about the future if the change is hard. Because sometimes just writing out what you think versus letting it stay inside is exactly what moves you to the next step of getting you closer. And we just don't do enough. We don't take enough time for it. So
This is Jordan. What are you seeing from other folks you've been chatting with, especially with this COVID? How is that affecting them, and what are other people kind of doing to, I don't want to say distress, but you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so the other thing is that I'm also the director of community impact for Woodland Center, so I probably see it more on that side of what I do. And it really is working hard with your employees to say, take advantage of your EAPs, making sure that people are reaching out and talking to someone. That's one of the things that Woodland Centers that we're really working on. We've created where businesses can sign a contract and just pay directly for people need to be talking, and they're not. You know, we can talk about and we can complain about being the teachers at home for our kids. So it's a lot of complaining, but it's not necessarily talking about really how do you feel about things and what is the burning inside. So encouraging businesses to really push out mental health information, that's going to be key. It has been implementing strengths, and people are like, oh, how do we do that when our business is, and that costs money. The reality is that people need a positive, and when people can understand their strengths and start to really have those aha moments, like was in my bio, there's nothing better. One of my clients, after he did some coaching with me, he had 2 promotions in 6 months because he understood himself so much better that he stopped trying to be everything. And here's the reality. So you have 34 strengths. I'll just give you a little tidbit about this. So you have 34 strengths. Your 1 through 10 or 12 are the ones you use every day, 12 through 24 sometimes, 24 through 34 rarely. So what happens is we see someone else being successful in doing and utilizing a strength, and we're like, ooh, we need to really work on that 24 through 34, and we need to improve there. Where the reality is, if you focus on your top 5 strengths and you work from that and you build your team based on strengths, opposing strengths, you're going to excel when you work from place of strength. The strengths was developed by, and one of the research things they did was they took a group of average readers and a group of excelling readers, did the same intervention. The group of average readers improved. The excelling group of readers improved 900%. When you work from your place of your strengths, you excel in a much faster pace because you understand, and you don't try to work in a place that's not your strength. Let's put it that way. You understand, and you might not be in, if you like your job or you don't like your job, it's about where do I belong? And I use the example as once I understood my strengths, I realized that I never should have been on church council. My strengths are too fast paced. That's not the type of volunteer activity that I should do. I need to do a 2-week fundraising volunteer opportunity. So your strengths, when you understand them, it goes into every aspect of your life, and you start to understand how to reduce conflict. You understand where you should volunteer if you do. It just changes. It changes your whole perspective. And it's different than DISC or Myers-Briggs because it doesn't put a label on you, but it says, Jordan and Kim, you're both maximizers, but Jordan, how do you use it? Because guarantee you're going to use it differently than Kim uses it. So it's different. So wasn't meant to be a strengths conversation, but strengths is basis for a lot of great things. So any other questions?
I do have one. This is Jeanette. This is called a strength finder. Is that what I heard you say?
It's Gallup Strengths, Clifton Strengths.
And can you put a link or give that information to Stephanie so she can
Yes,
pass
absolutely.
that on, that
Yep.
we can get connected to that? Thank you.
Yes. I'll send it to you, Stephanie, in an email with some information.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I like what you said too about shutting the ego down, because I think that's what gets a lot of us in trouble, you know, when we let that rule our thinking and take over our thought process. So if you want to elaborate a little more on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I actually do another presentation called Ditching Workplace Drama. And it's probably one of the most popular besides this one, just because of the time we're in. Usually Ditching Workplace Drama is the #1 presentation. And it really comes down to is the ego definitely gets in our way, right? And so one of the other things that you can do, because ego, when you talk about leadership and ego and how that works, and the open door policy that many managers leadership have, you still are in control of how to manage your people. How, even if it's your client or your employees are the people of your county or your community, you still set the boundary. And so boundaries is, I know, a key term used all over the place, but it is really important. And so one of the top things that I always share is a 3-sentence rule, and you can use this for yourself. And once you use it for yourself, you're going to be able to use it with other people. And I actually use it with my children. And the first thing is, so I was using the water cooler example before, like if we left a meeting and it didn't go as great as I thought, and Stephanie and Jordan were at the water cooler and my ego was making up the story, what is usually the first thing that people do when, if I would have seen them and there's an open door policy, I would have just went right into my boss and said, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Because that's what happens. I hear it all the time. Can I just have 5 minutes of your time? 5 minutes of your time turns into 45 minutes of the person complaining and saying, I saw Stephanie and Jordan at the water cooler. I know they were talking about blah, 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 blah. That's not right, blah, 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 blah. And the manager goes, okay, I'll take care of it. And the person will say, no, I just needed to get it off my chest. Don't do anything about it. Don't say anything about it. I just needed to vent. So you wasted an hour of 2 employees' time. And when you start to think about how much time is wasted from people, it's called BMW, bitching, moaning, and whining. It's a lot. If you think about the cost to your business or your organization, it's tremendous, because they say on average, and these are questions that I usually ask, on average, people spend 2.5 hours a day in the workplace complaining or bitching, moaning, whining to other people. So you have 2 staff then whose time is being eaten up and work is not being done. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be social, because social needs and connection has to happen in the workplace, but not in this fashion. So the 3 sentences, the first thing to ask yourself that I should have asked myself when Stephanie and I saw Ryan or Jordan were talking at the water cooler, the first thing that you ask yourself is, what do I know for sure? Well, I know Stephanie and Jordan are talking at the water cooler. Okay, do I know anything else? No. That should stop me right there. But if it doesn't, you can go to your second question. The second question then is, how do you feel about the situation? Okay. I really would have to stop and say, okay, so Stephanie and Jordan are talking at the water cooler. How do I feel about that? Well, if I still feel uncomfortable with it, then I have to go to the third question and say, well, what's my solution? If I can answer all 3 of those, that's when I get to walk through my manager's door. So if I'm silly enough to say, Stephanie and Jordan are talking to the water cooler, I feel anxious, mad, sad, whatever, and my solution is to not have them talk at the water cooler, I'm probably not walking through my manager's door and taking up her time. So it took 3 sentences to stop myself. But if I don't ask, I've already made up the story that Stephanie and Jordan were talking about me, talking about what we were in the meeting. I walk into the office, I say, I feel mad about this, but I don't want any solution. So it's all about those 3 sentences and then having the solution. And when the solution is there or an idea, that's when you get to walk through the door. And some people think that's harsh, But if it can give you back time and it's a boundary, and some people really need the boundary, some people don't. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced somebody who's always coming in the door and says they need 5 minutes, but takes 45. I just know it is one of the things that I hear all the time.
Say, Stephanie, you got a minute to go through a couple things on my punch list? Yeah, there's your 45 minutes right there. Sorry.
Yeah, and not everybody has it, but the ego does get in the way. So it's first of all about, like I said, a lot of it's all about you. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but change, ego, BMW, it has to all start here. And when the leadership is in tune with themselves and leads from that perspective, people follow. People replicate what they see.
Any other questions for Kim? All right. Well, if anybody does have any questions down the road, Kim's contact info is on our flyer for Lunch and Learn that you found out about this. It's also on our social media page, Facebook and LinkedIn and whatnot. And if you're not following us on either Facebook or LinkedIn, please do so. We'll keep you up to date as we have all kinds of wonderful things going on with Renville County HRA. So thank you so much, Kim. An absolutely awesome job. You have a gift. This is awesome. This is worth exploring. So this is great.
Well, I'm very happy that Stephanie invited me. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. And if you have any questions, you have my email. Feel free to email me at any time. More than happy to help however I can.
Thanks again, and thanks for everybody who was attending today. Have a great day.
Bye.